My name is Daniel Porter, and I've been a pastor for nearly 20 years. I've spent most of my life standing at the pulpit, sharing messages of hope, resilience, and unwavering faith in God's plan. But what I'm about to share with you is unlike anything I've ever spoken about before. This isn't a sermon. It's a testimony. It was a Saturday morning in early 2024, and like so many others, I started my day with a bike ride. It's something I do every weekend. My way of clearing my head, connecting with God, and finding inspiration for the sermons I deliver to my congregation. The morning was calm, the streets were quiet, and I remember thinking about the message I wanted to share the following Sunday. I felt at peace, as if everything in my life was perfectly aligned. But I had no idea that this ordinary ride would be anything but. What happened to me that morning wasn't just an accident. It was an encounter, an extraordinary and terrifying experience that would change my life forever. I didn't know it at the time, but this ride would take me far beyond the streets of my neighborhood. It would take me to a place where I saw things no human was meant to see, things that shook my faith to its core, but ultimately strengthened my understanding of God's purpose. This is my story, and I share it with you not to instill fear, but to deliver a message I believe was entrusted to me. A warning, a wake-up call, and a reminder of the hope that still lies ahead. I remember pedaling along my usual route that Saturday morning, the air crisp and quiet. It was the kind of ride that made me feel connected to God, like I was carving out space for Him to speak into my heart. But as I rounded a familiar curve, something felt off. It started with a wave of dizziness, sudden and overwhelming. My chest tightened and my breath came in shallow gasps. Before I could even think to stop or cry out, everything went black. I don't remember hitting the pavement. All I know is that in that moment, my consciousness was pulled away from my body. The next thing I knew, I wasn't on the street anymore. I wasn't in my neighborhood, my city, or anywhere I recognized. I was somewhere else entirely, a place that felt more real than the world I had left behind. The first thing I noticed was the sky. It wasn't the familiar blue expanse I'd seen every day of my life. It was an angry, fiery orange, a hue so intense it seemed alive. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as though the atmosphere itself carried the weight of destruction and despair. I looked around, trying to make sense of where I was. At first, everything was obscured by smoke and haze, but as it began to clear, the scene before me became painfully, horrifyingly clear. I was standing in what used to be a city, my city. I recognized the outlines of buildings, the remnants of streets I had driven on countless times, but everything was broken, crumbling, and lifeless. Skyscrapers that had once stood tall and proud were now jagged skeletons of steel and concrete. The ground was littered with debris, shattered glass, twisted metal, and the remnants of lives that had been torn apart. The silence was eerie at first, but then I began to hear it. Screams. They were distant but piercing, cutting through the thick air like knives. People were crying out, their voices filled with panic and pain. It was chaos, complete and utter chaos. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing, and my heart ached with a deep, inexplicable sorrow. This wasn't just destruction, it was despair, as if the very soul of the city had been stripped away. As I stood in that wasteland, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Fear, confusion, and heartbreak swirled within me. But beneath it all was a sense of urgency. I knew somehow that what I was seeing wasn't just a vision, it was a warning. This wasn't some distant or abstract reality. It felt immediate, like something that was coming, something we needed to prepare for. And just as I began to grasp the weight of what I was experiencing, the vision shifted again, pulling me deeper into the revelation of what was to come. As I stood in the wasteland of my city, the devastation around me became even clearer. Landmarks I had known my entire life, buildings that held memories of ordinary days and extraordinary moments, were nothing more than shattered remnants, buried under piles of rubble. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to ashes, their outlines barely visible beneath the destruction. The streets, once filled with life and movement, were now barren except for the people running in panic. Their cries echoed through the hollow ruins, a chorus of fear and desperation that I couldn't block out, no matter how much I wanted to. This wasn't just a city in ruins. It was a world unraveling. And then I heard it, the rumble of tanks. Looking down a broken street, I saw them rolling forward, their metal bodies crushing anything in their path. At first, I thought they were part of some rescue effort, but as they drew closer, I saw the flags they carried, Chinese and Russian. The soldiers marching behind the tanks had faces hardened by war, their weapons drawn, their movements precise and unyielding. They didn't look like they were rescuing anyone. They were claiming the city as their own. But that wasn't the worst of it. Among the invading troops, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Some of the soldiers weren't foreign, they were American. They wore the same uniforms, but they weren't fighting to protect their country. They were fighting alongside the invaders, helping them destroy the very land they had once called home. The betrayal was overwhelming. How could they turn on their own people? How could they align themselves with forces that sought to bring their country to its knees? As the tanks rolled on and the soldiers advanced, I saw families trying to escape, their faces etched with fear and hopelessness. Women clutched their children tightly, shielding them as best they could from the chaos around them. Men frantically searched for ways to protect their loved ones, their eyes darting from side to side, looking for shelter or an escape route. But the destruction was relentless. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I felt an overwhelming urge to help. My heart broke for these people, mothers, fathers, children, who were caught in the middle of something so much bigger than themselves. That's when I saw them, a family pinned under a pile of rubble, a man, a woman, and 2 small children were trapped, their faces pale with terror. The father was trying desperately to free his family, his hands bloodied from pulling at the jagged edges of concrete and steel. Without thinking, I ran toward them, shouting and waving my arms. "Hold on!" I yelled. "I'm coming!" I pushed forward, my feet crunching over shattered glass and debris. But just as I was about to reach them, everything went black. When the darkness closed in, I felt an unbearable weight settle over me. I wanted to help, to make a difference, but I was powerless to change what I had seen. The vision was clear. This wasn't just a war. It was the collapse of everything I had ever known, a tearing apart of the very fabric of humanity. And yet deep down, I knew this vision wasn't meant to leave me hopeless. It was meant to open my eyes, to show me the urgency of the times and the importance of turning back to God. As the darkness surrounded me, I braced myself to wake up. I thought the vision was over. But instead of returning to my body, I was pulled into something even deeper. Something I can only describe as a spiritual battlefield. I found myself standing in a realm where the physical and supernatural worlds seemed to collide. It wasn't like the chaos of the ruined city I'd just seen. This was different. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy, and I could sense a fierce battle raging all around me. A war not of flesh and blood, but of spirits and powers beyond human comprehension. In this place, I began to understand the deeper significance of what I had just witnessed. The destruction, the wars, the betrayal. They weren't just political or military conflicts. They were the physical manifestations of a far greater struggle, the spiritual decay of humanity. I could feel it in the atmosphere, a heaviness, a sorrow that went beyond words. It was as if the very essence of the world had been poisoned, and the chaos I had seen before was only the surface of a much deeper wound. This wasn't just about nations rising against each other or people turning on their own. It was about humanity's collective choice to turn away from God. The battles weren't being fought with guns or tanks. They were being fought in the hearts and souls of people, in the decisions they made every day to embrace or reject the truth. And then I saw them. The women and children. They were everywhere, scattered across this broken, desolate landscape. Their faces were hollow, their eyes sunken and desperate. They were starving, but not just for food. It was something deeper, something more profound. They were starving for hope. I saw mothers holding their children close, their arms trembling from hunger and exhaustion. I saw little ones crying, their tiny voices hoarse from pleading for help that never came. But it wasn't just their physical hunger that broke me. It was the emptiness in their eyes. Their gaze wasn't just searching for bread or water. It was searching for meaning, for purpose, for something that could fill the void in their souls. This spiritual emptiness was the most heartbreaking thing of all. I realized that what I was seeing wasn't just a vision of physical suffering. It was a reflection of the deeper spiritual crisis that had consumed society. These people had been starved, not just by the collapse of their world, but by the absence of faith, hope, and connection to God. They had been cut off from the only source of true life, and now they were wandering in darkness, searching for something, anything, that could save them from their despair. As I watched them, my heart broke. I wanted to cry out to them, to tell them that there was still hope, that they didn't have to stay in this place. But I couldn't speak. All I could do was stand there, helpless, as the weight of their suffering pressed down on me. As I stood in the midst of the desolation, I saw a figure emerge from the shadows. He was unlike anyone I'd seen before, radiating an aura of authority and calmness that seemed to draw people to him like moths to a flame. He walked confidently through the chaos, his presence commanding attention. People stopped in their tracks, their desperation momentarily replaced by a glimmer of hope. His voice, smooth and persuasive, echoed through the air. "Come to me," he said, his tone both comforting and authoritative. "I will give you peace, security, and everything you need. All I ask is your allegiance." The moment he spoke, it was as if a spell had been cast. The masses began to move toward him, their faces filled with a desperate hope. Mothers clutching their starving children, fathers weary from their struggles, and even the young and strong. All of them gravitated toward this man as though he held the answer to their suffering. But as I watched, unease settled over me. There was something in his voice, something subtle but undeniable. Beneath the promises of peace and security, there was a chilling undertone of control, of manipulation. This wasn't salvation. It was deception. Then the man began offering a mark. It was small, simple, placed either on the forehead or the hand. He promised that with this mark, they would have everything they needed: food, shelter, and safety. It was a way to survive, he said, a way to rebuild their lives amidst the chaos. People lined up eagerly, desperate for relief. One by one, they accepted the mark, their faces blank and emotionless as they walked away. But I noticed something chilling about those who received it. Their eyes lost their light. It was as if the mark didn't just grant them access to resources. It stripped away a part of their humanity. They moved like automatons, their individuality erased, their spirits bound to this man's control. And then there were those who refused, those who, I saw them, men and women, young and old, standing apart from the crowd. They were cast out, ostracized, left to fend for themselves in the desolation. Many of them were scared, their faces etched with the pain of rejection and isolation. But their eyes still shone with something the others had lost: faith, truth, and a connection to something greater. It became clear to me that this man was not a savior. He was a deceiver, a false messiah, and I understood in that moment that he was a representation of the Antichrist. His promises of peace and security were lies, carefully designed to manipulate and enslave humanity under the guise of salvation. As I watched this unfold, my heart broke for those who had been deceived. But at the same time, I felt a deep urgency, a need to warn others of what I had seen. This wasn't just a vision, it was a warning, a call to remain vigilant, to hold fast to faith, and to resist the lies that would come dressed as light. As the vision unfolded before me, it became clear that what I was seeing wasn't just a symbolic warning, it was a prophecy. I realized that the events I was witnessing weren't some distant possibility, something that might happen centuries from now. They were imminent, just around the corner. I felt it in the very fabric of the vision. The year 2025 was being impressed upon me with a weight I couldn't ignore. This wasn't a message about the far-off future. It was about the world we live in now, the choices we're making, and the path we're walking as humanity. The vision grew more vivid, each detail sharper and more haunting. I saw nations rising against one another, alliances crumbling, and betrayals cutting deeper than any sword. The chaos I had witnessed before, the destruction, the starvation, the suffering, it all seemed to be culminating into something even greater, a convergence of crises that felt unstoppable. The year 2025 was a crossroads. It wasn't just about war or famine or destruction. It was about the spiritual condition of humanity. The events I saw were the consequences of our collective choices, the price of turning away from God, of valuing materialism over meaning, comfort over truth, and self over salvation. It was a world that had forgotten what it meant to seek the light, a world consumed by darkness. As I stood in the midst of the vision, watching these events unfold, a deep urgency filled my soul. I realized that I had been shown these things not to instill fear, but to awaken. This vision wasn't meant to paralyze. It was meant to prepare. I knew I couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about physical survival, about food, shelter, or safety. It was about preparing our hearts and minds for the trials to come. It was about grounding ourselves in faith, standing firm in truth, and holding fast to the hope that only God can provide. I understood that time is short. The choices we make today will shape the world we live in tomorrow. We can't afford to be complacent, to ignore the signs, or to think that this is someone else's responsibility. Each of us has a role to play. Each of us must make the choice to stand in the light, even when the darkness presses in. When I finally woke up, my body weak and trembling, I knew my life had changed forever. This vision wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. It was a call to action, a plea to turn back to God before it's too late. I don't share this story to frighten you, but to prepare you. The time to act is now. If this message resonates with you, don't ignore it. Take a moment to reflect on your own spiritual journey. Are you ready for the trials ahead? Are you grounded in faith, prepared to stand firm when the world begins to shake? Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more testimonies and warnings like this. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it today. Together we can stand firm in God's truth and face the future with hope and courage.